You open the fridge at 11 at night. You stand there, the light hits your face, and you stare at shelves like they owe you something. Your ancient ancestors never did that. Not because they had more food sitting around waiting. Because on any given day, they already knew exactly where the next dozen food sources were and what condition they were in. Here's the lazy version of prehistoric eating you've probably absorbed from a documentary or a supplement ad. Caveman hunts mammoth. Caveman eats meat. Caveman occasionally chews a berry out of desperation. For 99% of human history, that picture is mostly wrong, and the actual evidence, the stuff pulled out of the ground, not guessed at, tells a much stranger, much more interesting story. Start with a grinding stone. In 2010, researcher Anna Revedin and her team examined tools from sites across Europe, in Italy, Russia, and the Czech Republic, dated to around 30,000 years ago. Under a microscope, these stones were covered in starch grains, not from wheat, from cattails and ferns, plants ground down into something close to flour, likely mixed with water and cooked into a flatbread over a fire. 30,000 years before anyone planted a single seed on purpose, humans were already turning wild plants into something resembling bread. Sit with that for a second. Bread, or something close enough to count, existed 20,000 years before farming did. Here's where the caveman eats meat picture really falls apart. Anthropologist Amanda Henry has spent years analyzing isotopes preserved in ancient human bones and teeth, and the pattern she finds isn't one diet, it's dozens. Groups living in the Arctic ate diets that leaned heavily on meat and fat, because that's what the landscape offered. Groups in parts of Africa and Southeast Asia ate diets dominated by plants. Tubers, nuts, fruit, and seeds made up the bulk of daily calories, with meat as a smaller prized addition rather than the main event. There was no single prehistoric diet. There were as many diets as there were landscapes to live in. But it gets stranger. One of the best documented modern hunter-gatherer groups, the hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert, were studied extensively starting in the 1960s by anthropologist Richard Lee. He tracked what they actually ate, day by day, instead of asking what they said they ate. And the answer surprised almost everyone at the time. Meat carried enormous social prestige. A successful hunt meant status, storytelling, a shared feast. But the actual majority of daily calories came from something far less glamorous, the Mongongo Nut. Abundant, reliable, and nutritionally dense enough that Lee calculated the hoansi could meet their caloric needs working roughly 2 to 3 days a week, gathering and preparing food. 2 to 3 days a week. Read that again next to your own calendar. This single data point became the foundation of one of the most quietly radical ideas in anthropology. In 1968, Marshall Sahlins published a paper called The Original Affluent Society, building directly on Lee's field data. His argument wasn't that hunter-gatherers had more stuff. It was that they had more time. Because their wants were matched to what a landscape could reliably provide, they weren't chasing an ever-expanding pile of needs the way agricultural and industrial societies eventually would. Scarcity, Sahlins argued, isn't just about how much food exists. It's about the gap between what you want and what you can get. And pre-farming humans, in many documented cases, had a smaller gap than we do. Here's the part that quietly reframes everything. Agriculture, the thing we usually credit with solving the food problem, often meant more labor, less variety, and worse nutrition, not better. Skeletal evidence from early farming populations frequently shows shorter stature and more signs of nutritional stress compared to hunter-gatherer populations before them. The wide, flexible foraging diet got traded for a handful of dependable but narrower staple crops, more food, in raw calories, but a poorer diet in almost every other sense. Now picture an actual day, not a highlight reel, an ordinary Tuesday, say 20,000 years ago, somewhere with a mixed forest and a river nearby. Morning starts with checking a handful of known plant patches. Maybe wild greens are ready, maybe not yet. A stop at a stream for shellfish or fish, depending on the season. Nuts gathered and cracked in the afternoon, sitting by a fire. Meat, when it happened, was an event, shared out, talked about, remembered. Most days, though, ran on plants, nuts, roots, and whatever small game showed up along the way. Less like a hunting movie, more like an incredibly well-informed grocery run through a landscape with no cashier and no expiration dates you didn't already know by heart. There's a real cost hiding underneath all of this, and it's worth landing on. A hoansi forager 60 years ago cracked Mongongo nuts by a fire, eating a diet built from dozens of wild foods their community had mapped for generations. Today, someone opens a paleo protein bar, marketed with a cartoon caveman on the label, and a promise of eating the way our ancestors did. Almost nothing about the actual ancient diet survived into the branding built on its name. Not the variety, not the labor pattern, not the relationship between a person and the specific landscape that fed them. The word got kept. The reality got left behind. None of this means every hunter-gatherer group ate well, or that prehistoric life was easy. Famine, seasonal shortage, and real hunger absolutely existed, and the record doesn't hide that either. The honest answer is that what ancient humans ate isn't one story with one answer. It depended entirely on where they stood on the map. What we do know, backed by grinding stones, isotopes, and decades of careful fieldwork, is that the picture was wider, smarter, and often less meat-centered than the one most of us carry around in our heads. So the next time you're standing in front of an open fridge at 11 at night, deciding between 4 different foods that all came from somewhere you've never seen, picture the other version of that moment. A forager scanning a landscape they'd known their whole life. Not desperate, not simple, just reading a map built from memory instead of a door built from steel. Different fridge, same basic question. What's actually here, and what am I going to do with it? What's the strangest ancient food fact you've ever heard? Tell me below, and if this changed how you picture prehistoric life, that's exactly why this channel exists.